This is a tale of two parks. On the one hand, there's the park we have today, a vibrant national seashore protecting not only an ecologically stunning remnant of America's Atlantic coast, but entire communities. Communities that are still lived in today, communities that fought for this park. You'll find endangered species, cultural touchstones, and the only federally designated wilderness area in the entire state of New York. You'll find peace and quiet and solitude just a stone's throw away from the largest city in America. This park was born in unity, in the diverse communities that coalesced around a common cause to protect a place they loved. This park was the vision of many. On the other hand, though, there's the park that could have been. A park defined by highways and parking lots and concrete, lots of concrete. A park choked in the smog of endless automobiles, marshes maimed, dunes devastated, communities consumed. A park less concerned with ecological integrity as with engineering efficiency. This wouldn't have been much of a park at all, really, but rather a monument to ego, power, and bureaucratic indifference. This park was the vision of one. My name is Cameron, this is National Park Diaries. This is a channel dedicated to telling stories from the world's protected places. They are educational, fun, engaging, and they cover all sorts of park-related topics, from ruthless, park-destroying, bureaucratic maniacs like this one, but also things like biology, ecology, geology, natural history, cultural history, and a whole lot more. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell thing so you don't miss an episode. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me a little more directly. You can get up to 3 extra videos a month plus access to my Discord and a few other perks over at patreon.com/nationalparkdiaries. This channel is entirely fan-funded and your support truly does go a long way toward making these videos possible. Now, this video is brought to you by Sky's the Limit Videos, who has patiently waited for this one to get made. Our friend Peanut Better 2753 has also requested a video on this topic, and I am happy to oblige you both. If you have any requests for topics you'd like to see, viewer suggestions are always welcome in the comments below. Now, for the urbanists among you who have either A, heard of this story before, or B, used your powers of deduction based on the park and location I described, you may now be realizing that this story is, of course, about Robert Moses. But fear not, I will spoil it for you now. He does not come out victorious in this one. For the non-urbanists among you, though, let me give you a bit of background on Robert Moses. I apologize for what you're about to see. Robert Moses was, well, what wasn't Robert Moses? In a general sense, he was a New York urban planner. He had an obsession with highways, bridges, public works, and power. The bureaucratic kind, not the electricity kind, although he did dabble in hydroelectric projects. Anyway, he used his position within the New York state government to influence every level of public planning, to touch every public works project that went out the door. He did this through political favors for his friends, accruing seats on boards and commissions like candy, bullying and strong-arming his opponents, and manipulating media coverage. Through these practices, he became the most powerful man in New York, with his finger on the scale for whichever projects he deemed worthy. Often, these projects centered around freeways and expressways. Moses saw the private automobile as the great equalizer, capable of whisking people away to any and all destinations their hearts could desire. In his mind, cars were the most democratic form of transportation, and he saw it as his personal duty to build roads and highways to more places so that more people could visit them. Only his version of democracy was only accessible to those middle-class Americans who could afford the cars and who could afford to leave the cities for suburbs in them. Those who couldn't, well, not only were they left with an urban environment devoid of people and wealth, sapping the life out of once vibrant places, but their communities were slated for destruction. yeah, Moses's projects had an uncanny ability for destroying and displacing minority communities. Only it wasn't uncanny because he did it on purpose. Even in places where he had less destructive options, Moses still chose to ram his freeways right through the heart of thriving minority neighborhoods. He even referred to the people who lived there as animals. So yeah, that's Robert Moses. I would say I'm sorry for portraying him as some sort of cartoon villain, but I'm not, because he basically was one. The man had an ego the size of Manhattan, a domineering aversion to compromise and any vision that wasn't his own, an undemocratic, racist vision for the urban environment, and bullied into submission anyone who opposed him. Also, he was unelected. He wielded his power over the New York bureaucracy to full autocratic effect. But his fetish for highways and concrete did not stop at the urban environment. His ruthlessness extended to the realm of parks as well. Parks were for the people, of course, and for Moses, the only way to get people to the parks was in private automobiles via high-speed, limited-access freeways. And once they were there, they had to park those cars, so of course these parks were paved over with acres upon acres of surface lots, which Moses euphemistically called fields. In his mind, though, this was a genuine conservation philosophy. He really believed that the best way to protect these parks and provide public access to natural places for everyday Americans was through a vast network of automobile infrastructure. He just forgot the part where, you have to protect the natural places people were coming to see, since he was too busy destroying them for highways and parking lots. Now, if you've clicked on this video and have made it this far, it's no spoiler to tell you that in the case of Fire Island National Seashore on the southern shore of Long Island, New York, Robert Moses did not get his way. He was, in fact, defeated at the hands of the same communities he sought to displace, no less. We'll get to that in a minute, but we don't actually have to speculate at what might have happened to Fire Island if Moses had gotten his way. Because right next door to Fire Island is a place where Moses did get his way, and we can look to it as an example of what might have been. See, Moses had this vision for an ocean parkway traversing the entire southern shore of Long Island from Jones Beach to Montauk. It was to be a limited access, high-speed freeway depositing suburban Long Islanders and New Yorkers at public access beaches all along the coast. He would develop parks at these beaches, again in service of his democratic vision for automobile-dominated public parks, surface lots, and all. Now, to be clear, I'm not just talking about a simple transatlantic country road here. The Ocean Parkway was basically an interstate and would have chewed up massive amounts of land and destroyed precious coastal habitat on islands that, at points, are not even a mile wide. He would have had to drain marshes, clear-cut forests, and, his specialty, displace communities. This wasn't a woulda, coulda, shoulda, though. Again, he did do this on Jones Beach, right next to Fire Island. I mean, look at this. And this. And this. Jones Beach got the Moses treatment, and Fire Island was next on his list. So Moses first set his eyes on Fire Island back in the 1920s as part of his overall vision for the Ocean Parkway. But even back then, the residents of Fire Island opposed him. They refused to sell their land and essentially created a bottleneck in the project. They stalled and bought themselves time for something, anything that would prevent Robert Moses from destroying their community. This worked for a bit. It wasn't really an organized opposition or campaign at this point. It was just a bunch of individuals who weren't interested in selling their land for a freeway project. But then, in 1938, a massive hurricane strikes Fire Island, damaging large parts of it. And immediately, Moses jumps on this. He uses the hurricane as a justification for his parkway, claiming that by building it, he would stabilize the dunes and thus protect these communities from flooding and future storms. Remember this argument. He would come back to it again and again throughout the years for support of his parkway. He was using conservation as a smokescreen for his monolithic car-infested park of the future. So yeah, remember that. But here's another interesting thing about the 1938 hurricane. Keep this in mind too. The damage was not uniform across the island. Those communities which had done the most damage to their dunes were the same ones who suffered the most damage to their properties. Those communities who had protected and preserved their dunes had escaped the worst of the damage. Again, we'll come back to this. Now, after this initial foray into highway diplomacy, things go silent for a bit. World War II kind of, put a bunch of stuff on hold. But after the war, America became a suburban nation, and it became a nation of automobiles. Robert Moses was primed to come to the peak of his powers as the winds of change finally blew his way. Cars and freeways and suburbs, heck yeah, that's right up his alley, and he builds them with reckless abandon throughout New York. And he renews his fight for Ocean Parkway on Fire Island. But that opposition is still hanging around. Still not fully organized yet, but they're on their way, and they are definitely against Ocean Parkway. They organized this Save the Great South Bay campaign, and they actually had the support of a congressman from New York by the name of Stuyvesant Wainwright, who actually proposes the idea for a national seashore back in the early 50s. But as you can probably tell from his name, Stuyvesant Wainwright was an aristocratic Long Islander of the WASP variety, and his framing of the national seashore was all about preserving a rustic way of life, which right off the bat had an image problem. It was viewed as elitist. If you want a national park, you need national support, and preserving an island for your rich friends is not the way to do it. Moses pounces on this, again, banging the drum for his inherently democratic highway-fed public park idea. He'll take any opportunity to push his freeway idea, any angle he can get. Plus, he was terrified of a federal park. He had absolute power in New York, but all of that would go away if the feds were in control. So he pulls out all the stops, the bullying, the strong-arming, the lying, the media manipulation, the works, the classic Moses playbook. And then, in 1954 and 1955, back-to-back years, Fire Island sees more devastating hurricanes, more damage, more homes destroyed. Robert Moses pounces again. He was relentless, trotting out the whole roads as conservation line. He's got the elitist argument and the roads as conservation argument. These are his go-tos, his bread and butter. Again, any angle that would give him a leg up, he would take it. Now, let's come back to those dunes we talked about before. They're not the deciding factor here. They're not quite enough to tip the scales at this stage, but enough to kindle a flame, to plant an idea. Places with more intact dunes fared better during these storms. I mean, this is well known today that dunes and intact barrier island ecosystems do a great job of buffering mainland areas from storms, but back then, not so much. And the state of New York is having to pay for all this damage from all these storms, all this cleanup. But they're noticing that dunes are this kind of natural protection. If they could restore the dunes in more places, maybe they could mitigate some storm damage. Moses, of course, prattles on about his roads as conservation thing again and how his beloved parkway would stabilize the dunes, but his project would cost tens of millions of dollars, and his claim is dubious at best. Again, dune restoration is not enough at this stage to influence any decisions, but the seed has been planted that maybe, just maybe, natural restoration and protection is a better outcome for Fire Island than an over-engineered mega highway. The real beginning of the end for Robert Moses, though, started in the early 1960s. First, there's another storm in 1962, the Ash Wednesday storm, and Moses rolls out the old line again, but he's really putting off major old man yells at cloud vibes at this point, because that same year, Silent Spring was published, setting off a great environmental awakening across the United States. People start pushing back against pollution, industrial waste, raw sewage, and their waterways, pesticides, environmental destruction. This is the birth of modern environmentalism in America. And for Fire Island, that meant a reframing of the national seashore debate. It shifted from that elitist way of life preservation to a more natural beauty / natural scenery / ecosystem type preservation, more in line with the newfound environmentalism sweeping the nation. The seashore was a natural solution to storm mitigation rather than the over-engineered solution Moses had been pushing for the last 20 years. That made the idea of Fire Island National Seashore much more palatable to, well, the nation, not just the locals who lived there. And speaking of those locals, let's finally bring them into the story because they're really the driving force behind the National Seashore movement that would ultimately become successful. Those locals form a very interesting coalition against Robert Moses. See, there were 17 different communities on Fire Island, and they were just about as different from each other as you could get. They were stratified by creed, class, sexuality, political persuasion, you name it. For example, the Pointa Woods community was highly insular. They didn't like anyone who wasn't white, straight, or Protestant, and they enforced these prejudices through strict codes and covenants. On the other hand, a community like Cherry Grove was more bohemian and eventually became a haven for the gay community. Saltaire was a rich resort community with a reputation for partying, and Dunewood was more your traditional middle-class suburb. The point is, these communities had nothing in common except one thing. Maybe two things. They loved Fire Island and they hated Robert Moses. None of them, despite their differences, wanted the Ocean Parkway to slice through their communities and displace their residents. So they coalesced around a common cause and fought Robert Moses tooth and nail, taking advantage of the new American environmentalism and gaining the support of the new Secretary of Interior, Stuart Udall, who was a big proponent of shoreline preservation. They attended town halls, conducted letter writing campaigns, finally got the media on their side, and persuaded local businesses to support their cause. They got the momentum and they kept it. This new wave of support was too much even for Robert Moses. I mean, he tried, he didn't go down without a fight. His ego and lust for power wouldn't let him. But his bag of tricks had finally run out. On September 11th, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the legislation turning 33 miles of Fire Island into a national seashore. In 1980, nearly 25% of the island was designated as a federal wilderness area, the only one in New York State. The new seashore wasn't without its growing pains, and there was controversy surrounding the new federal administration, but at least it didn't have the Ocean Parkway running through it. Fire Island had been saved from Robert Moses. All right, that's the story of Fire Island. Let me know your thoughts below. Leave a comment if you also hate Robert Moses. We can have a little urbanist party down in the comments there. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more park stories. Hit the little bell so you don't miss an episode. Follow me on Instagram. It's the easiest place to get in touch with me and stay up to date on channel happenings. Check out my Patreon, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.